Rusty Coones here. I have with me Sheldon Sherman of Pro Rider Antelope Valley, former motor officer, expert rider, great instructor, and we're going to talk about safety tips and other stuff pertinent to your safety when you're riding. I think this is a really important interview to watch if you don't watch many others. And let's just get right into it in a minute. How you doing, Sheldon?
Good. How about yourself?
Good, man. Thank you very much for coming here, man. I'll tell you
Um,
what you do is, really important. I think more people should get the training that you're putting out there, especially in the beginning, but also, as you've told me before, you have the advanced training for people that have been riding for a long time, and there's stuff they really don't know that they think they do.
right. Absolutely. There's so much training out there, and it really doesn't matter what type of training you want to do. If you want to learn how to do wheelies, they have wheelie schools. If you want to ride three wheelers, if you want to ride track, there's low speed, accident avoidance skills. There's so many different types of training out there that'll help you become a much better and safer rider.
Right on. Well, before we get into all that, I want to go back in your life to your first experience with two wheels.
Okay. It started probably when I was about 12, 13 years old. My friend at the time, he let me ride his little 50cc bike, and it was an absolute blast until somehow I ended up in somebody's driveway and ended up rear-ending a car. And it scared me so much that I literally had the throttle wide open, and I was still like just running or pushing into the back end of this car. So my buddy actually had to like come over and stop me and get my hand off the throttle to finally stop the motorcycle.
That sounds familiar, man. When I was a little kid, I had a mini bike, and all the other kids want to ride your mini bike. And I let a guy jump on it, and he just did a little semicircle right into the double car garage door, just head on, full throttle, couldn't stop, locked up. And even after he hit it, I think he had his hand locked on the throttle, I think.
Yep.
Luckily, it was a little Briggs and Stratton with a centrifugal clutch, so it didn't do a lot.
Right. Yeah. From there, that was when I was probably about 12 or 13. From there, when I was about 21, 22, I got another bike. I got a Suzuki Gixxer 600, and then I had that for about 6 months. And doing what most kids do, I was like, it's not fast enough. I need something faster. So then I went up to the Gixxer 750. From there, I ended up target fixating or focusing on an object on the side of the road, and it caused me to go off the road. And luckily it was a dirt shoulder, so I was able to just slow down and stop. But I may not have been that lucky. I could end up hitting a guardrail or something like that. And at that point, I decided to park the bike. I sold it, and then for about 7, 8 years, I didn't ride. And then I decided to get back into riding, and I bought it was a 2015 BMW F800 GS. Rode that for a little while, and then realized, I'd really love to become a motor, because I was working for a police department at the time, and the motors always seemed to have a smile on their face, and I was like, well, I want that. So that's why I decided to become a motor. So that required me to buy an additional bike, buy a training bike, which was a BMW R1200 RTP, which was just an old police bike. So I spent a year training on that bike. A year, 5 days a week, an hour a day, training the cone patterns that I was going to be doing in the motor school. Let's see. From there, I ended up as a motor, and I passed the class. I became a motor. After a few years, I ended up buying a BMW R1250 GSA, and then a 2020 BMW R1250 GSA, and then my last bike, or my bike currently, is a 2023 BMW GSA, 1250 GSA.
Yeah, you've got the one that's like enduro style, so you can go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So it'll do dirt. I mean, it doesn't do dirt well. I mean, it's a heavy bike. It's a 600
yeah,
pound bike, plus me on it, plus gear on it. So you're looking at 900 pounds easily.
yeah.
Taking on track, canyons, just regular freeway riding, and it does everything decent.
Yeah, those are surprisingly fast. I mean,
Yeah,
you can cruise as fast as you want to cruise on that,
yeah, and they're very, very comfortable for long distance rides.
So tell me, what made you decide you wanted to start teaching? Didn't you had an incident when you were a motor officer?
Yeah, well, one, I had a motorcycle accident about a year and a half into my motor career. Pretty much, I was responding to a gas leak at a high school, or what we thought was at a high school. Had my lights on, had my siren on, and I wasn't going real fast. I was probably going about 45, 55 miles an hour. Came up behind a car, and the car slowed down and stopped. There wasn't really anywhere to pull over on the shoulder, so I was like, okay, cool, they're yielding to me. So I start to go around him, and he makes a left turn onto a side street, and I end up pretty much broadsiding this car. According to my partner who was behind me, I went somewhere between 15 to 20 feet in the air. And then I found out later I slid for 102 feet.
Wow.
So broke my leg, dislocated shoulder, had some pretty significant road rash because at the time I wasn't wearing proper riding gear.
Damn. Yeah. Took a while to heal up from that one?
It took me almost a year. I think I went back to work after 10 months. When I went back to work, I still wasn't walking properly because I wasn't moving around a lot. I was just sitting at home, sitting on the couch, doing nothing. So I think it took me 2 days to be able to walk properly because I was actually having to walk. But I spent probably 9 months doing physical therapy, either in-home physical therapy or driving somewhere to get physical therapy, 2 knee surgeries, and I was finally cleared to go back to work.
Mm-hmm. How long after that did you decide to retire and start your school?
So when I went back to work, I felt fine. But about 3.5 years later, my knee pretty much told me I was done. Getting on and off the bike multiple times a day, on top of carrying probably almost 40 to 50 pounds of gear on me at all times, the arthritis in my knee just said you were done.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me, what gave you the incentive to start the school?
Well, so the Pro Rider Antelope Valley, which is the course that I own and run, I started teaching that because as a motor officer, we learn a lot of important skills. Low speed skills were pretty much the key for me to being able to go much faster. Once I learned proper clutch and throttle control, learning how to properly apply your front brake, your rear brake, how to properly turn the motorcycle, I became a much, much faster rider, especially going through the canyons. And I wanted to bring that to the everyday rider to hopefully help reduce fatalities, because for single vehicle motorcycle accidents, cornering is the #1 reason that motorcycle riders are getting killed.
Yeah.
So if I could help teach riders how to properly operate their motorcycle, I'm hoping I'd be able to keep more people alive on the road, more motorcycle riders out on the road.
Definitely. And you know what, while you're talking about that, with the failure to negotiate a turn basically being the most common fatality with a motorcycle, can you explain to people a little bit about being in a turn and what people do? A lot of the time they focus in the turn and they're not looking through the turn,
Right. So what a lot of people end up doing is they we call it 50 fencing, or where they're not looking all the way through the corner. And when they don't look all the way through the corner, they're having to make constant adjustments to make sure that they actually stay on the road. The other reason that riders are getting themselves hurt or killed is excessive speed. Not excessive speed for the corner, but excessive speed for that rider. Because I've been to multiple motorcycle accidents where they were going through a corner and they crashed, and I'm like, well, how fast were you going? And he's like, well, I was going about 40. I'm like, okay, but I can take that corner at 80. So it tells me you don't know how to ride your motorcycle.
Yeah.
The other reason that motorcycle riders were getting killed was because they didn't know how to operate their motorcycle. They didn't know how to counter steer the motorcycle. And I think the last one's alcohol. Alcohol is probably one of the biggest reasons that motorcycle riders are getting themselves killed also. I believe almost 33% of all motorcycle fatalities in California had a positive BAC or blood alcohol content.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen that a lot. So another big one for me is lane splitting, and people not paying attention in the cars. And a lot of riders are out there splitting lanes, between the number one lane and the diamond lane, for instance, where it's pretty wide, and they see that wide width, it looks like a drag strip, and they just haul ass because they think it's open, but they don't understand it. 2 cars up, the guy might cut in front of you, and you're going too fast, you're not going to be able to stop. So you have a lot of that. Can you give a little advice on, or expertise on lane splitting?
So when you are lane splitting, you shouldn't be just paying attention to the left lane right next to you and the right lane next to you. You should be paying attention to all of the lanes. Because what I've seen a lot of times with cars is they'll be on the far right lane, they're just getting on the on-ramp, and now all of a sudden they want to go from that right lane all the way over to the carpool lane, and they'll just cut all the way across. So you really got to be paying attention to what the traffic's doing. And you never want to become comfortable or relax while you're lane splitting, because there's so many different things that can happen. Obviously, most of the time when you have the carpool lane and the lane right next to it, it's really wide. It's like an invitation to go as fast as you possibly can.
Yeah.
There's a couple issues with that. One, if you're riding on top of the painted lines, if for some reason you have to brake hard, you pretty much have lost all of your traction. It's almost gonna be like trying to brake in the rain. So you really want to remember that and try to stay off those painted lines. And secondly, even though I know even motor officers would ride on the painted lines or ride on top of the double yellow lines, it is illegal to do so. And that's something you should be aware of, because you could get a ticket for driving over the double yellow lines. Yeah.
And man, that is slippery as heck when you're on those painted lines. I mean, it's like, not like ice, but it's pretty bad, and if it's wet, forget about it,
Yeah.
And then also you have a lot of the concrete freeways versus asphalt freeways, and the concrete's really slippery when it's wet. It's like more slippery than asphalt in most cases. Now, another thing.
Yeah, if it's concrete, you definitely.
Yeah. Now, another thing that I noticed with a lot of unskilled riders is when they panic stop. Say you got 2 riders going down 25 miles an hour in town, right? Side by side, or even staggered, and somebody just runs out into the sidewalk in a crosswalk. They run right out in front of them. Well, the skilled rider, he's going to use his front and rear brake. He's not going to have a problem. He's not going to lose traction. He's going to stop in time. But an unskilled rider freaks out. They hit the rear brake. They forget about the front brake. They'll skid right through the crosswalk and either hit the pedestrian or almost hit them sometimes. I've had people do that riding with me before. And on the freeway, I've seen where people cut across like you're talking about, like coming up to an say there's a freeway interchange, and you've got a guy in a box truck, and he says, "Oh man, I'm gonna miss this thing." So he starts cutting across in front of everybody. You have an unskilled rider that's over, in one of the slower lanes. This guy cuts right in front of him. The guy doesn't and it's in a turn even. And if it's in a turn, people don't understand, if you brake in a turn, you're gonna go the direction the equilibrium is going. You know what I mean? You're not gonna brake, and it's gonna throw you to the, if they're making a slight right on the freeway, you're gonna brake and you're gonna go to the left, you know?
Right.
So there's a lot of people get in accidents that way.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that every rider should be working on is their braking skills. Because if you're abrupt with that front brake, if you just grab a fistful of that front brake and you don't have any type of ABS, it's just going to lock that front wheel up, and it's going to throw you down on the ground just as quick. Same thing with the rear brake, and a lot of people get in the mindset, or they've heard, don't use the front brake because that's how you crash. Well, it is, you could crash that way, but your front brake has at least 70% of your braking power. And if you're on a sport bike, it can go up to 90, 95% of your braking power. And where people get themselves in trouble is they were long-time dirt bike riders, and they transfer over to the street, and that's where a lot of times people just get comfortable with using the rear brake because that's all you use on the dirt is just the rear brake.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a lot, where people would apply just the rear brake and they would slide all the way through an intersection right into the side of a car.
Yeah, I've seen that. And another thing, at intersections, there gets to be a buildup of sand from construction trucks and gravel and different things a little bit, and a lot of people aren't aware of that on motorcycles, and it's real slick. They're like pebbles, and or marbles, and they go through there and they're either accelerating in the turn or braking or whatever, and the bike just goes right out from under them,
Right.
And if it's early in the morning or when it's got dew on the ground, it's even worse.
Yeah, especially with corners, and that's why you need to look all the way through the corner. As you're coming up to a corner, you should be looking for hazards of any sort, rocks, if it's wet outside, and that's why you should actually look all the way through the corner so you can gather up information regarding that corner.
Yeah. Right on, man. Well, let me see. I think we've covered a lot of it. Do you have any other techniques you want to talk about, or safety tips while we're on here?
Well, we talked about what's killing motorcycle riders in single vehicle crashes. Probably one of the most important things to work on is intersections. Intersections is the #1 killer of motorcycles. When you're coming up to coming up to an intersection, even if it's a stale green, slow down, look both ways, because somebody could end up blowing that red light. So whether it's just turned green or it's a stale green, slow down, pay attention to what other people are doing, and never count on eye contact. And that's probably one of the biggest things that a lot of people get themselves in trouble with. They make eye contact with the other driver, but the other driver is updating their Facebook account or their Instagram account or something like that, or they're daydreaming, or they may be doing all sorts of crazy different things. So never depend on eye contact. And
that's funny because I do that a lot. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
So one of the biggest ways to keep yourself alive on the road on a motorcycle is playing the what if game. Well, what if this car pulls out in front of me? I'm 500 feet away, I can just slow down. Well, now I'm 400 feet, 300 feet, 200 feet. You should always have a plan on how you're going to escape to help keep you safe.
Right on. And talking about escaping, late at night, around the time the bars close, if you're on a motorcycle, you're really in a spot sometimes because there's a lot of drunk drivers out there, and the streets are kind of opened up. There's not a lot of traffic, but there's a lot of drunks. And if you're on a motorcycle, you got a smaller tail light. They don't notice you sometimes. So I've had this happen to me, and I think about it all the time. Every time I come up late at night to a stoplight and I sit in the lane, I kind of like to stay on the left side of the lane, not right in the middle. And I look at the people coming up behind me in the mirror as they're coming up. And as they get closer, it makes you nervous because I've been hit by somebody that came up behind me, and then I eased over to the left side of the lane, almost straddling both lanes. And the guy still sideswiped me a little bit. He was drunk. and he spun through the intersection. And luckily, I didn't get hurt bad. The bike wasn't damaged, but he could have killed me if I was in the center of that lane, not watching him in the mirror and didn't move over. He would have got me straight on, and it would have just probably broke my back, you know?
Right. There's a couple of things that you can do with something like that, especially late at night. Obviously, if you're drunk, you don't have a lot of options. But what I would usually do if I'm out late at night, I would actually flash my brake light. And I got tired of doing that, so I actually bought some extra lights that when I apply the brakes, it flashes 3 times, pretty much telling drivers, hey, get off your Facebook, let's pay attention to the road.
Yeah.
And with the lane position, you have to be kind of careful with that. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to lane position. It might be the left side, maybe the right side, maybe the middle. With the middle, you can look bigger, but like you said, if you're on the left-hand side, it makes it easier, or the right-hand side, it makes it easier just to get the heck out of the way quicker than it would be if you're in the middle of the lane.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough one because you're right on all respects with that. You know what I mean? It's just, man, I've seen it too many times. And once you've been hit like that, it's always on your mind when you see somebody coming up behind you at a stoplight, even in the middle of the day, like just on a standard boulevard with 2 lanes on each side going both directions. I come up behind cars. I kind of want to get off on the left a little bit of my lane, and so that I can go in between. If some guy's out of controls and he's going to rear end me, I can jump right in between the other cars, kind of, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, and one of the things that I always tell riders is it depends on your comfort level. I prefer to be at the front of the intersection. If it's like a whole line of cars, I prefer to split lanes, get up to the front of the intersection, but some people aren't comfortable with doing that. So if you aren't comfortable with doing that, stay where you are, but pay attention to what's going on around you. Pay attention to the rearview mirror. Once I have 2 or 3 cars behind me, I've got a good buffer. So if somebody loses control and crashes, hopefully it won't hit me.
Yeah.
Then I can relax a little bit. But when you're on a bike, it's a ton of fun. And to me, there's no better escape than riding a motorcycle.
Yeah.
But we've got to be careful on how we ride, because another thing I always tell my students, we're something below bicyclists. You have motorcyclists and you have bicyclists. Motorcyclists expect everybody to kill them. Bicyclists expect everybody to get out of the way, and then you have cars and on up.
Yeah.
So if you play that what if game, you can keep yourself a lot safer out on the roads.
Back to the intersection again. You were saying that you prefer, say there's 4 or 5 cars stacked up at the intersection at the red light, right? You come up on your bike behind them, you split in between to get up to the front of the intersection. Is that what you were advising, if you can and feel comfortable?
That's how I would feel more comfortable, because if you're not going to do that, you want to have an escape route, like you were talking about being readily available. But yeah, it's going to make you much safer if you can get in front of cars and you can create a buffer between you and the cars that are approaching and coming up behind at the intersection.
And I do that a lot of the time. I do go in between. My bike's really wide. I've got that BMW K1600B bagger, and I think mirror end to mirror end is like 39 inches or something. It's really wide. So a lot of time I can't get in between all the cars and the mirrors and everything to get up to the front of the intersection. So I kind of hang back because I don't want to be bumping people's mirrors. You know what I mean? But if I can easily get up there, I do ease up there, to the front and sit there a lot of the time, kind of in between the cars a little bit. And how do the motor officers feel about that? Are they okay with that, or does it bother them when riders ease up to the front at the intersection?
So, technically lane splitting is legal in California. What we don't like to see is where you park your bike in the crosswalk. You can't block the crosswalk.
Right. So as long as you stay behind the crosswalk, you can be in between the cars and you're okay. So just don't put your front wheel over the crosswalk line, correct?
Correct.
Good. That's a good one. I've always, thought about that. I think that's a good point to put out there in this interview,
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's see. Do you have any other safety tips?
I think we've about covered it.
Right on, man. Right on.
There's so much stuff that we could go over, but
Yeah.
Talking about the intersections, talking about cornering where most riders are getting themselves killed are probably one of the two biggest things to really talk about.
I agree with you, man. And I really appreciate you coming on here, man. I think you imparted some really good knowledge. And I want you to, if you don't mind, give a shout out to your school and talk about your courses a little bit. Like you have different levels of training that you do. Can you kind of tell people about that and put out your website?
Yeah, so my business is called Pro Rider Antelope Valley. My website is proriderantelopevalley.com. And what we teach during the course is the low speed skills. It's the skills that I learned as a motor officer to help keep me safer out on the roads. But we also work on higher speed accident avoidance skills, swerving, maximum braking, stuff like that, stuff that's going to keep you safe. So those are the big things. Clutch control, brake control, throttle control are huge no matter what type of training you're doing. And if you can learn these skills and really hone these skills, you become a much better rider, and learning new skills becomes so much easier. That's why it was so much easier for me to pick up on skills, because once you have new training, once you have the basics down or master the basics, it makes it much easier to learn something new. When somebody's telling you, hey, do this, you're like, okay, cool. It's a little bit more throttle, a little less brake, da, 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 da. So, and it doesn't matter who you are or how much training you have, continue to take training. I take at least 3 to 4 training courses a year, not just for fun, but because it makes me a better instructor, because I learn new things and new things that may work better for people that I'm teaching.
Right on. So you've got different levels. You've got the entry level where people are trying to get their motorcycle endorsement, all the way up to riders that have been on the road for 30, 40 years even, right? You can teach them new tricks and things that they didn't know.
So I teach through the California Motorcycle Safety Program. I teach the basic and intermediate riding course. And then through my business, I only teach the skills I learned as a motor officer. So I teach for a lot of different places. But through Pro Rider, I don't teach the basic riding course. I just teach the motor officer skills.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, thank you very much, Sheldon. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
And
thank you for having me.
One of these days, I'm going to take that course, the advanced one that you were talking about. You know what I mean? Get that bagger out there and run through the cones.
That would be awesome.
Thank you. Talk to you later, man.